Samuel Thornton had lived on his Montana ranch for 12 years, long enough to know the rhythm of the land, the language of the wind, the way the seasons moved across the valley like a slow, endless breath. He knew the places where the deer came to drink, the rocks where the eagles nested, the patches of wildflowers that bloomed each spring. But there was one thing he had never been able to understand. The woman who had arrived 18 months ago, who had bought the old Henderson place, who kept her distance from everyone, especially from him. Her name was Margaret, though he had only learned that from the postmaster, who had mentioned it in passing. She was a widow, he had heard, though no one knew where she had come from or why she had chosen this remote valley. She kept to herself, tended her garden, walked into town once a month for supplies, and never stayed longer than necessary. She did not attend church, did not visit neighbors, did not accept the casseroles and pies the town women left on her porch. She had built a fortress around herself, and she guarded it fiercely. Samuel told himself he was not watching her. He told himself he was just a neighbor, being neighborly, keeping an eye on the property that bordered his own. But he knew the truth. He noticed when her light went out at night. He noticed when she hung her laundry on the line. He noticed the way she hummed when she worked, a sad, slow melody that drifted across the pasture and made something in his chest tighten. He noticed that she was alone, that she had been alone for a long time, that she seemed to have forgotten how to be anything else. The morning had started. Samuel woke to a sky the color of old iron, the air cold and still. He went about his chores, feeding the horses, mending a fence, checking on the cattle, and tried not to look at the smoke rising from her chimney. But there was no smoke. He told himself she had slept in, that she was ill, that it was none of his business. But the hours passed, and the chimney remained cold, and by midday, a knot had formed in his stomach that he could not untie. He went back to work, tried to focus, tried to ignore the silence coming from the homestead next door. That evening, he walked to the edge of his property, as he had done 100 times before, and looked across the pasture at her cabin. No light in the windows. No smoke from the chimney. No movement anywhere. Her chickens were scratching in the yard, but no one had let them out. Her horse stood in the corral, its head hanging low, its trough empty. Something was wrong. He stood there for a long time, his hands in his pockets, wrestling with himself. She had made it clear she wanted to be left alone, but his gut told him to cross the pasture. He went back to his own cabin and tried to sleep, but sleep would not come. He lay in the darkness, listening to the wind, and every time he closed his eyes, he saw her cabin, dark and silent, waiting. In the morning, he crossed the pasture before he could talk himself out of it. The sun was just rising, the frost thick on the grass, and his boots left dark prints in the white. He stood at her door for a long moment, his hand raised, his heart pounding. And then he knocked. There was no answer. He knocked again. Still nothing. He walked around the cabin, peering through windows that were shuttered and dark. The garden she had tended so carefully was overgrown, the vegetables rotting on the vine. The woodpile was untouched, the axe still leaning where she had left it. Her horse nickered at him from the corral, its side sunken, its water trough dry. Samuel's gut clenched. Something had happened to her. He went back to the front door, tried the latch, found it unlocked. He pushed the door open, and the smell hit him, first stale air, cold ashes, and beneath it, something else. Sickness. The cabin was small, one room with a loft, and it took his eyes a moment to adjust to the dimness. He saw the cold hearth, the table with a half-eaten meal still on it, the chair overturned as if someone had fallen. And then he saw her. She was on the floor by the bed, curled in a blanket, her face pale, her lips cracked, her eyes closed. He crossed the room in 3 strides, dropped to his knees beside her, pressed his fingers to her neck. Her skin was cold, her pulse faint, but it was there. She was alive. Barely. He carried her to the bed, wrapped her in every blanket he could find, built up the fire until the cabin was warm. He brought water from her well, forced it between her lips, watched her swallow. She did not wake, but her breathing steadied, and some of the color returned to her face. He stayed with her through the morning, through the afternoon, watching the rise and fall of her chest, counting each breath. He should go for the doctor, he knew, but the doctor was 20 miles away, and he was afraid to leave her alone. She woke at dusk, her eyes opening slowly, confused, unfocused. She looked at him, and for a moment, he saw fear in her face. The fear of a woman who had spent 18 months making sure no one saw her like this. "What are you doing here?" She whispered, her voice rough, her hand clutching the blanket to her chest. "You were sick," he said. "You've been unconscious for 2 days. I found you on the floor." She closed her eyes, and a tear slipped from beneath her lashes. "You should have left me," she said. "You should have let me be." He did not leave. He stayed through the night, sitting in the chair beside her bed, watching her sleep. He fed her broth when she was awake, gave her water, changed the cool cloth on her forehead. And in the quiet hours before dawn, when the cabin was dark and the wind was still, she began to talk. She told him about her husband, a man she had loved, a man who had been taken by fever 3 years ago. She told him about the life they had planned, the children they had wanted, the future that had been stolen from her. She told him about the silence that had followed, the walls she had built, the decision to come to Montana because it was far enough from everything she had lost. He listened without speaking, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes on her face. He understood more than she knew. He had lost people too, had spent years learning to live with the silence, the emptiness, the weight of being alone. He had built his own walls, maybe not as high as hers, but just as thick. "I know what it is," he said, when she had finished, "to be afraid of letting someone in, to tell yourself it's safer to be alone, to forget what it feels like to care about someone." She looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw something shift. Recognition, perhaps, or the beginning of understanding. The days that followed were different. She let him bring her food, sit by her fire, talk to her about the ranch, the cattle, the winter that was coming. She let him fix the fence she had let fall into disrepair, chop the wood she had been too weak to split, tend to the horse that had been neglected. She did not thank him, but she did not tell him to leave. And at night, when the cabin was warm and the fire was low, she hummed again, the same sad melody, but softer now, as if she was not sure she remembered how. One evening, as the first snow began to fall, she asked him why he had come, why he had crossed the pasture when everyone else had left her alone, why he had broken into her cabin, found her on the floor, stayed by her side. He was quiet for a long time, staring into the fire, trying to find words for something he did not fully understand. "I heard you humming," he said finally. "Last summer, when the evenings were long, I used to sit on my porch and listen to you, and I would think, that's a woman who has forgotten how to be happy." And I wanted to remind her. She did not speak for a long time after that. She sat in her chair, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea, her face turned toward the window where the snow was falling. When she looked at him again, her eyes were bright, but she was not crying. "I didn't think anyone noticed me," she said. "I didn't think anyone cared." He shook his head slowly. "I noticed," he said. "I've been noticing for 18 months. I just didn't know how to tell you." She looked at him, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was a small thing, fragile, but real. "You could have started with hello," she said. Winter settled over the valley, deep and cold, and the distance between their cabins seemed to shrink. Samuel came every day, sometimes to help with chores, sometimes just to sit by her fire, to listen to her talk, to watch the way her hands moved when she knitted or mended or cooked. She started to hum again, not the sad melody from before, but something lighter, something that sounded almost like hope. And one night, when the snow was falling so thick they could not see the lights of her cabin from his, she asked him to stay. He stayed, He stayed through the winter, through the long nights and the bitter cold, through the storms that buried the valley in snow. He learned her rhythms, her moods, the things that made her laugh, and the things that made her quiet. He learned that she had a scar on her left hand from a childhood accident, that she was afraid of thunder, that she talked in her sleep. He learned that she was stronger than she knew, braver than she believed, and more beautiful than she would ever understand. And somewhere in the darkness of that Montana winter, he fell in love with her. Spring came slowly, the snow melting into streams, the grass greening beneath a sky that seemed to go on forever. Samuel stood on her porch one evening, watching the sun set over the valley, and she came out to stand beside him. "I have something to tell you," she said, and her voice was different, softer. He turned to look at her, and in her face, he saw something he had never seen before. Peace. "I stopped being afraid," she said. "Somewhere in this winter, I stopped being afraid of losing someone again. I stopped being afraid of wanting something." She took his hand, her fingers cold against his, and looked up at him. "I want you, Samuel. I have wanted you for a long time." He pulled her into his arms then, and she came to him like she had been waiting for this moment her whole life. Her face pressed against his chest, her arms around his waist, her breath warmed through his shirt. He held her against the fence, against the valley, against the sky that was turning from gold to rose, and he felt something he had not felt in years. "Whole. I thought you would never let me in," he said, his voice rough, his lips against her hair. "I thought you would keep your walls up forever." She pulled back, looked up at him, and smiled. A real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. "You knocked," she said. "You just had to knock." They were married in the summer, in the meadow that separated their two properties, with the mountains watching and the wildflowers blooming. The whole valley came neighbors she had kept at arm's length for 18 months. Women who had left pies on her porch, men who had tipped their hats and never stayed to talk. She wore a dress of white cotton, and in her hair, she wore a flower he had picked from the field where they had first met. He stood beside her, his hand steady, his heart full, and when the preacher asked him if he would take this woman to be his wife, his voice did not waver. "I will," he said, and the words carried across the meadow, across the valley, across the years of loneliness that had brought them here. That night, they sat on her porch, their porch now watching the stars come out over the land that had kept them apart for so long. She leaned against him, her head on his shoulder, her hand in his, and for a long time, neither spoke. "I spent 18 months being afraid," she said finally, "and all I had to do was let you in." He kissed her forehead, her cheek, her lips, and when he pulled back, her eyes were bright. "You were worth waiting for," he said. "You were worth everything." The lights of their cabins glowed in the darkness. Two homesteads that had been separate for so long, now one. And in the Montana Valley, two people who had spent their lives keeping the world at arm's length finally let someone in and found, at last, the home they had been searching for all along.